Hi everyone, welcome to our rendering teardown section. My name is Simon. Today we're going to have a look at this interior rendering and talk a lot about lighting and a little bit about texturing mainly. So we can still start about composition first. As you can see, we're dealing with a frontal view that is quite simple and efficient. We're a little bit offset on the right side, which is not really a problem, I guess. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. If we check the alignment, you can see that the horizontals are horizontal and the verticals seem vertical, so that looks good to me. This is something really important when you're doing frontal view, is that you have to be perfectly aligned with your facade, or basically the wall you're looking at, because otherwise it'll look a little bit weird. Beside that, I think the main problem I can see here is with the lighting. Basically, there's a couple of things here. The first thing is natural lighting. As you can see, we have some sort of natural light, or at least softbox that brings light in the foreground here. And we have a quite bright area here, which is the window, so that's quite logical. So this is our primary lighting. The thing is, it's a little bit counterintuitive. Well, there are two things that are counterintuitive. The first is that this is extremely bright out here, and it doesn't seem like there's any light penetrating inside the space, which is kind of a shame in a way. You can see here there's actually a little bit of light coming behind the curtain, but it doesn't seem to be going through the material. Maybe it comes from the refraction settings or something like that, I don't know. But either way, it would be more interesting, I think, to have more direct lighting getting inside your space. Even though it seems to be like an overcast weather outside, you would still have some cast shadow. They would be extremely soft, which would be actually quite nice, but you would have to have some sort of cast shadow. And if you don't have them, it would be interesting to reorientate your sun so that you actually get some cast shadow and a brighter area here. Because as you can notice here, the thing that is kind of a problem, I think, is that the foreground is light, the background is light, and the middle ground here is extremely dark compared to the rest of the area. If we put it in black and white, it's a little bit more obvious. You can see here like how dark it gets, and it's kind of not what you want to happen, because this is the space you're trying to show. And the thing is, when we're talking about composition, your eye is always going to be drawn to the lighter area and not the darker parts. Which means if you look at the picture, you're basically looking at this part, and maybe a little bit of the spots here, which is not really what you want. So what I would suggest is actually inverting the light here. So that would mean here I created a two curve adjustment. One is darkening the foreground and the other one is lighting the middle ground. So as you can see, if I switch it on and off, like that, sorry. Here you have the first version, sorry, where you basically, like, the first thing you see is here, or the foreground, and here when you try to recenter the attention on the actual subject. This is what usually, you know, a lot of people use that vignetting thing when you put it on the corner here. It's a little bit like that. Basically, the vignetting is actually trying to make you focus in the middle of your image. So it's a little bit the same here, where we're trying to refocus the image on the actual project and not in the foreground or in the background. Obviously, there are still things that would need to be more interesting, because here it doesn't seem like there are any shadow, like they're extremely soft, so you cannot really see them, which is well, it's not necessarily a problem, but it's always interesting to have cast shadows at some point so that you can have more dynamic contrast. And basically, if we had like light coming here and lighting this seat here or chair, what would happen is that we would have a slight ream effect here with a bit of light. This would be in the sunlight. This would be in a nice soft shadow. We would have cast shadows here. We would have nice highlights on this part here, and cast shadow of the chair here. And the same would happen here. That way we would have like the brighter area of the underground with like light on it, and then a darker area because it's in the shadow. So that would sort of recreate an interesting dynamic in terms of contrast here. So that would be the main thing. Second thing regarding lighting is the artificial lighting. I'm not a huge fan of using artificial lighting in daylight scene. I know it's, well, a lot of people do it. I usually try to avoid it for a simple reason that having artificial lighting in a daylight image sort of means that even if you were in the middle of the day, your project would be too dark to actually just rely on natural lighting, and you would have to use your artificial lighting, which is definitely not a selling point for anybody. So this one, like the sort of linear light here, could be interesting because it's sort of like more about decoration than actual lighting. But these ones and this one is not really bringing anything to the image, I think, especially since what would happen normally with this kind of light is that you should sort of be able to see through this light shade here, and you would have a sort of light lighting the bottom part here. So artificial lighting are extremely complicated to tweak and to understand properly, so I would try to bring them in your image only when they are really necessary. The other thing is that they are extremely cold. Usually when you're in a living room space, you want your artificial lighting to bring warmth in your interior, which means you would use warm temperature. Here in our case they're extremely white, so it doesn't really bring anything. It would be more interesting, I think, if we had not that one, if I had a little bit of warmth in our spotlight. That would sort of look like this. Wouldn't have to be too conspicuous, but still, so that you basically, the idea is that you could counterbalance the white area of the natural lighting with some warmth artificial lighting here. That's the idea. Anyway, that's if you really want to keep them. I would just get rid of most of it. Regarding the lighting, I think that's pretty much it. So as you can see, we're just refocusing the attention in the middle of the image. A couple of things that would need to be considered as well, I think, is the texturing. There are a couple of minor tweaks that should be done. Basically here we're dealing with let's say 3 main materials. We have the wood here, and this main wall, which is quite different from the rest. So what you would want is to actually work here. It looks extremely flat, so what you need is just to add a little bit of bump map and a little bit of variation in the glossiness. So basically using dirt maps and other bump maps that you would have in your library, so that you have slight variation of reflection in your area here. The same goes with the floor here. As you can see, there's something that is a little bit problematic, is that wherever you have a dark or a light plank here, the glossiness seems to be exactly the same, which is not really what's happening in real life. So what you want is to have slight variation of glossiness for each plank, and also like another dirt map that you could add on the overall surface, so that you have slight variation that crosses from one plank to another. So basically the idea is to, like here, this would be the basic material, and you would have to tweak it a little bit so that the reflection we have here from the window would be slightly different from one plank to another. Same goes with the wood here, which for some reason doesn't seem to have any reflectivity. It can happen, of course, but you have to be careful, because if we're considering wood, you always have at least a bit of reflectivity, even if you're not treated it, or if it's just like raw wood, there's still a bit of reflectivity. So same for, like, maybe the veins will be a little bit darker and the reflectivity will be a little bit higher on the lighter part, etc., etc. Last but not least is the mapping. You can see here that this is the same map being reflected over and over on the vertical part of the model. So what you want is to actually have a variation of the UV mapping on your objects, because every time you see this kind of repetition, it's kind of a problem. The rest of the model is actually quite good. I mean, like in terms of storytelling, it's a tiny bit neutral, I'd say. It would be interesting to add a little bit of something more personal, like maybe cloth, or like, I don't know, something that sort of shows that people are living here, but not like, I'd say, random people. It's always interesting to try to add a little bit of storytelling that sort of creates a backstory for your image. I did a whole series of articles regarding this, so you should have a look at it. It's in the Details per Space series article on the blog, so I'll write the link in the info. Beside that, I think we're pretty good. I'll quickly do some small adjustments and I'll get back to you when I am done. We'll see, but I think it's going to be pretty quick. So, as you'll see, it was only like a couple of tweaks. There was a couple of things. So as I said, this, just a tiny bit of a curve adjustment layer, because it was still lacking a bit of contrast here, as you can see. Also a little bit of burn and dodge. The burn tool is quite fun to use, and it's easy to create imperfection and variation in the values for an object. And the dodge is quite fun also to use if you want to create this sort of bloom effect around the window. It's a little bit like, I've exaggerated it a little bit, but the idea is here, so it's pretty good. There's one thing I've noticed while I was working on it also, is that if we draw, there's always something you have to be careful with the backdrops in your image. So say we have this is, oops, this is our line, there it is as well. This is our horizon line, oops, here. And the thing is, well, done it a little bit too far. Anyway, and here you can see that this is the backdrop here has its horizon line a little bit further. So you have to be careful that basically here we can see it better, to match the lines, perspective lines of your render with the perspective lines of your of your backdrop, because I'm pretty sure here there's a slight offset that is not really good. It's not gonna like jump to your eyes at first, so it's not a big deal. It's just that once you start to look at the image better, it's something you tend to notice. So I'll stop the video here. I hope you've learned interesting stuff in this video, tips and tricks on how to focus your image on the actual project and not lead the attention on the periphery of the project, which is definitely not what you want to happen. And I'll see you in the next teardown. Bye guys.
Schneider.